Handbook for the recently deceased.
Deceased.
Hey Beetle guys and girls, it's Heidi from Channeling Spirits. Today we are going to crack open our favorite text and find out what is exactly in the Handbook for the recently deceased. We'll look at the actual prop, various drafts of the script, and of course,
Beetlegeist.
the classic dark comedy from the 80s. We'll include some speculation on what else might have been written in it.
God, this book is so stupid. I can't understand anything in it.
When one of the prop handbooks was auctioned in 2012, we got a look into what a screen-used book actually was. The piece was an old psychology textbook with the front cover and spine repainted. The title page notes,
Look at the publisher.
Handbook for the recently deceased press.
this is the same publisher and apparently author of The Living and the Dead booklet Charles Dietz reads at the end of the film. The following page states it was published in the United States and lists the 50 printings it has had, starting in 1620 with its last printing in 1938. The next page is Preface on Psychology. This text has been identified being from Edward B. Green's book, Measurements of Human Behavior, published in 1941. According to the auction, the rest of the text is unaltered from the original book. But outside of the prop, what was in the actual handbook? Some of this is revealed in the movie overtly and subtly. Some we can assume might be from previous drafts in the script, and some we can only conjecture. Previous drafts describe the handbook differently. In the June 1st, 1985 draft, it's a massive sheaf of index pages in a bureaucratic-looking binder. It looks like a year's tax code. By the August 4th, 1986 draft, it bore much closer resemblance to what we see on screen. It describes Barbara picking up an ancient leather-bound book. It's yellow and worn, about the size of the Boy Scout manual. One mystery is, who dropped off the book? Barbara seems to imply it appeared when Adam visited Saturn's moon, Titan.
I don't know where it came from.
Perhaps some civil servant from the Netherworld dropped it off, or Juno herself. The table of contents seems to be as confusing as the subject itself.
Is there an index or something?
Well, this book isn't arranged that way. What do you want to know?
The 1985 draft does elaborate a bit more on its structure.
Warning. Proceed step by step through this manual. Do not begin on Section 2 until you have fully mastered the concepts contained in Section 1.
Then start with Section 1.
Section 1. Behavior at the funeral. Paragraph 1. Lie very still.
That's starting at the beginning, all right. Anyway, we didn't have a funeral that I can remember.
I think I'm going to skip ahead a few pages.
It goes on to say,
This book reads like the tax code. I don't see anything about rewards and punishments or heaven and hell.
which may answer Barbara's question.
Are we halfway to heaven? Are we halfway to hell?
Beetlegeist.
Doesn't seem to adhere to the Christian afterlife. Rather, the Maitlands are told they must reside in their house for 125 years.
We spent 125 years on Earth.
125 years. I can't believe this. I can't believe they didn't tell us.
This doesn't seem to be a punishment or reward.
Maybe this is heaven.
But those who commit suicide apparently are forced to become civil servants. For more on that, check out our other video, Did
Beetlegeist.
Commit Suicide? What happens to the Maitlands after 125 years is unknown. Maybe they find peace or simply cease to be. Maybe they end up in the Lost Souls room. After all,
That's death for the dead.
more on that later. The handbook likely explains how one dies is how they permanently appear in the afterlife.
This is what happens when you die. That is what happens when he dies. And that is what happens when they die. It's all very personal.
Being restricted to the house and the assignment of 125 years seems to be individual to the Maitlands as
This book reads like stereo instructions. Listen to this. Geographical and temporal perimeters. Functional perimeters vary from manifestation to manifestation.
Their geographical perimeters are expounded upon in the 1985 draft, where Barbara walks through a mirror in the closet and enters an inversion of their bedroom. She is nearly trapped before escaping, and Adam states, "The handbook discourages that sort of experimentation. Transdimensional instabilities, whatever that means. Leaving the house results in them being transported to Titan, as seen in the movie. This rudimentary knowledge is probably what was covered in Section 1 of the handbook. We also know there is a series of rules laid out and..."
In the book, rule number 2, the living usually won't see the dead.
Won't or can't?
It just says won't.
The 1986 draft adds, "Just says won't. Wait a minute. Here it says the living are arrogant. They think they'll never die, so they refuse to see the dead." Otho nearly sees the Maitlands, and Lydia Deeds obviously does, explaining,
Well, I read through that handbook for the recently deceased. It says, live people ignore the strange and unusual. I myself am strange and unusual.
there is likely a section devoted to the bureaucratic process of the Netherworld, which the Maitlands are chastised for being ignorant of.
You probably haven't even read through the manual completely yet.
Which probably explains what the secretary tells them, that they only have 3 help vouchers or Class 1D90s intercessions with their caseworker Juno, and that to meet with her, they must make an appointment and bring their handbook.
We forgot our handbook.
Adam does read how to get to the Netherworld.
In case of emergency, draw a door.
We also know there is at least 1 chapter entirely dedicated to haunting, if not more.
The intermediate interface chapter on haunting says it all.
There might be a variety of techniques or suggestions in those chapters. Intermediate interface implies that they may also be novice or expert interface chapters as well. Juno states,
You should have been studying those lessons since day 1.
the 1985 draft also identifies another section.
Section 17C, Intercessions and Exorcisms.
Exorcism? That's where they get rid of us, right?
Not this kind. This is where we get rid of them.
What do we have to do?
It won't work. We need a graveyard.
This original idea is modified to become the spell Otho calls out, which accidentally exorcises them.
They're dying!
No, they're already dead. They can't feel a thing.
Had he succeeded, they would have no doubt gone to the Lost Souls room. We know this is explained in the handbook as,
That's the Lost Souls room. A room for ghosts that have been exorcised. It's all in the handbook.
so if we had to break down the structure of what is likely in the handbook for the recently deceased, we would say, Section 1 probably covers post-life procedures, from how to behave at your funeral and how to cope with such an existential shift in being. Section 2 probably lays down the basic structure of the afterlife, that being that there is no reward or punishment system, and possibly that based on the merits and discretions of one's life, dictates the geographic and temporal perimeters each individual encounters. Section 3 might be a series of rules and restrictions, including the living will not normally see the dead, and probably to not leave your handbook around.
Never trust the living.
Sections 4 and possibly 5 could be the bureaucratic process of the Netherworld, considering how dense the material is. Sections 6 through 8 might deal with varying degrees of interfacing with the living. This might be the bulk of the book, considering Section 17C is about exorcisms and intercessions. This might be about removing the living or caveats for the recently deceased to avoid to ensure that they are not exorcised. There may also be a concluding section on becoming a lost soul, or what happens after your temporal perimeters have been reached. But what do you think? What other topics might exist in the handbook that we didn't cover? Let us know your thoughts. We're dying to know. As always, if you liked this video and think we deserve it,
You two have really screwed up.
please subscribe. Feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Heidi with Channeling Spirits, and thanks for watching. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice!